Ain't no surprise I didn't get these scars from falling over in church. I told some lies, broke some laws and ties instead of good hard work. When I die, I'll take nothing that I took down in the dirt. Lord, I'll cry.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me today. Sorry about not having one out last week. Had to travel for a wedding. Congratulations to my new sister, Amanda, and my new brother, Dylan, for their wedding. Very happy for them. Drove down to Gatlinburg area in Tennessee. Let me tell you, that place is very, very pretty, but it sucks because there's just so much freaking traffic. But besides that, beautiful place. Tennessee is really, really pretty. So let me think here. All right. Yeah. Last time we talked about detoxes. And I think I ended it by talking a little bit about the importance of sleep when it comes to your body cleaning itself. And I'm just going to go ahead and use that segue to kind of talk about everything today, which is sleep. Now, I don't want you guys to think that I'm talking about sleep from like a perspective of I've got this crap all figured out, because I really don't. If I'm being perfectly honest, I sleep like shit all the time. And I've slept like shit pretty much for a while now. And I would like that not to be the case, but I'm doing things to work on it. So this is something that I have thought about for a long time, sleep in general, just how important it is because of the research done by Dr. Sachin Panda, once again out of UCSD and in San Diego, California at the Scripps Institute. Personally, I feel that some of his work on the body and how much we are kind of reliant on our circadian rhythms for health is some of the best stuff that is not talked about by our health experts throughout the world. So before I really get into this, I kind of want to share a story about a time that was like a full circle moment for me in sleep. And I used to work at a golf course, and I would have to open on weekends sometimes. And opening at a golf course is like 4 a.m. start time for work, because some of these idiots get up to go golf like as the sun's coming up. Like they can't really even see where they're hitting their ball, but because, they hit the ball like 110 yards down the fairway, because it's usually a bunch of old men and old women. They can't hit the ball worth a darn anyways. They know that it's probably straight and 100 yards up, and they just go out there in the dark, and by usually the turn, it's daytime. So often I would get to work and have no recollection of how I got there. I couldn't tell you anything about the drive. I had no memory of it at all. And it didn't make much sense to me how that could be. And there wasn't a whole lot of research out at the time for me to kind of look at and go, well, why is this the case? Like, why am I not really having any memory of these drives or these kind of early morning activities that I do? It was almost like a dream state in a way that it felt like a very vivid dream, like it was real, but I had no attachment to it outside of a vague memory that obviously I drove to work. But I don't know if you've ever woken up in like the middle of a deep sleep before and had to rush out of the house, and you may have begun driving to your destination, and then kind of a light bulb pops on your head and you realize that you really have no idea how you got to where you were. Like you could be sitting at a stoplight and then all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, I'm driving. How did this happen? It's like you're conscious and aware, but nothing's getting logged in your brain at all. And sleep is this incredibly complex thing. It's probably one of the most underutilized things that we do as humans for our mental, physical, and just emotional performance daily. It's an enigma in ways. But I personally believe that the reason why I have put so much focus into this recently is because I do think that sleep is probably the single most important thing that we can do for our overall health. Now, sleeping too much has some negative to it, obviously, because it's like you're hibernating, you're not really existing in society, you're just sleeping. And a lot of the time, oversleeping and sleeping at any opportunity that you can, some health experts would say that that's one of those common signs of depression or unhappiness with your life, that you're just choosing to be in an unconscious state rather than participate. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just getting your standard 8 hours of sleep a night, your REM cycles in. It's a time where you are not involved with your body talking to itself, looking at itself and going, where what's not working right? What's hurt? What needs to be fixed? Where do we got some crap we can clean up? And when you're getting in those 4 cycles in your sleep, the too early and too late windows, that's when your body can really take care of those things. So, to start like thinking about it, I always start with what is it? That's my first thing. So what is weight loss? What is this? What is that? Well, what is sleep? And I wish I had a good answer for you outside of like a textbook definition, like a natural process. So what did I write down? Sleep is a natural process of rest the human body goes through daily, driven by 2 forces, biological and chemical. So that to me is a non sequitur answer. It doesn't really give me anything other than to tell me 2 forces, biological and chemical, which I can then dig into. But just telling me that it's a process my body goes through daily doesn't help a whole lot, because it's the definition of sleep. In order for it to make sense, you really have to dig into those forces that drive sleep and drive wake states and drive those things that force us into a period of time where we need to sleep. If you really think about it from a biological standpoint, sleep is the most dangerous thing that you can do. And the fact that we all do this, millions and billions of people do this on a daily basis, where we just kind of all agree to be unconscious at the same time, for the most part, in a given area based on time zones. And we are out for 8 hours, like a third of our life. Like, it requires so much of us, our time for sleep, just to be in a good state so that we can live actively during those times. But like, if you think about that, not living in a nice protected home, not living in a place with walls and windows and locks, like, for thousands and thousands of years, people were having to sleep in makeshift things up in trees, whatever it is, in order to get this requirement. Sleep would have been significantly different for those people than it is for us. And just trying to kind of understand how whether you want to believe that we were created or whether you want to believe we were evolved, from an evolutionary standpoint, it seems so counterproductive to require 30% of your life be spent unconscious. From a creationary standpoint, I still don't understand. I still don't understand why God would have created human beings with a need that 30% of their life has to be wasted. And I say wasted because I hate that I have to sleep. Like, at the end of the day, if I could take a pill and never have to sleep, I wouldn't. I hate sleeping. I think it's a waste of time, but it's a requirement. So I have to figure out how to have a better relationship with sleep, which is what I'm doing, and which is what I'm encouraging you to do, is to look into this and do your own research. But I'm going to provide you guys some basic information that I've found at my disposal pretty easily, as well as just through podcasts, reading, videos. I like to take in media in all different types of formats because my brain latches onto different concepts depending on how I take it in. If I look at a picture, my brain might take a picture of that picture and kind of vaguely store it. I don't have an eidetic memory where I can just recall word for word things that I read off a page. I don't necessarily have a photographic memory where I can read things like it's off of a picture that my brain took, like snapshot, and I'm just looking at it. But my brain kind of works as association, a combination of sounds, combination of visuals. And when I take in different information, and what I'm encouraging you to do, so I'm sorry to take this sidestep of sleep to talk about how to educate yourself, but you probably know at this point what ways you take in information best and at least which ways you take it in the worst. Some people's reading comprehension is super, super low, but their, kinesthetic memory is through the roof. If they can just get their hands on it, manipulate it a little bit, feel it, touch it, it's like perfect recall for them. So what I would say is, if you're looking for information on a topic, whether it's sleep or anything else, look for various forms of media, and you might review the same information 5-6 different times in just a few different ways, which completely impact your ability to act on that information in a better way. So some of you might listen to these podcasts and go, man, that was really cool information, but then have no memory of what we actually discussed on the podcast in that day. But maybe you watch the video while we're doing it and you see the thing behind me and you see my nonsense hand gestures, or you see me pull out my vape and take a hit. And then it kind of like creates this weird recognition of something in your head where it's like that memory is now tied to something deeper because it's affecting multiple areas of your memory. So, sorry for the side note, but I never want you guys to take what I say as the gospel and be like, yeah, well, Zach said this, so I can just believe it. I may be right today, but I may not be right tomorrow. And I honestly thought about doing an entire podcast talking about how shitty science is. And I might do that at some point, but look, I'll leave it here and I'll come back to this story in the future when I talk about how bad science is and why you need to be constantly doing more research and new research and looking at what data is out there, is because depending on who's doing it and where it's being done, it's going to be biased. But in addition to that, the information may just change over time. One of the worst things that you could do in, let's just say up basically in still possibly, but for a huge period of time, and we'll say specifically like the 1700s to let's say like the 1500s to the 1800s. Seeing a doctor was one of the worst things that you could do. They're going to put leeches on you. They're going to cut you up. They're going to bleed you. They're going to apply chemicals to your body to burn you because they thought that your body was all trying to balance out these different fluids, whether it was, bile, blood, water, yellow bile. I think they had yellow bile, black bile, blood. So, I don't know, some other nonsense. And it was all about trying to balance those things out. And if you want to know more about that, go look into how George Washington died. Just go look at how a cold turned into one of the worst things that ever happened to him and eventually his death because doctors. And we'll come back to that story. I'll share more about that, but science is not always good. So this is the best information I can offer that I believe is available now and based off of sources that I believe have done good quality research. So when I gave a definition of sleep as a natural process that the human body goes through daily that is driven by two forces, whether they're biological or chemical, I want to talk about those forces for a second because I, for the longest time, just thought, well, your body gets tired and it falls asleep. Yes, and more. It's not yes and no, it's yes and more. So chemical forces, when we talk about chemical forces, we're talking about, and sleep, specifically, we want to look at a chemical called adenosine. And adenosine has different variations. Like adenosine triphosphate is the energy that our body utilizes for movement. Sugars are converted to ATP in the mitochondria and essentially create energy for our body that can be used and utilized at a cellular level. And our body runs off ATP, and it has such a small amount available at each time, but it can produce it very, very quickly. Now, adenosine in this sense is not necessarily the same, but it is the same. We're just looking at a different form of adenosine. So this chemical builds up in our system as we are awake. And the longer that we're awake, the higher the levels are in our system. And that kind of creates what I'm going to refer to as a sleep hunger in a way. So the longer you're awake and the more you're doing stuff, the more hungry you get potentially as the day goes on. And you can either ignore that hunger and push it off till later, and those feelings of hunger will ebb and flow even if you haven't given yourself something to eat. Or every time that you're hungry, you can eat. Well, with sleep, there are different things that are going to pull on that, like the foods that we eat and whatnot. But for the most part, this chemical force that drives sleep is done by a chemical called adenosine. And as it builds up in our system, it essentially drives this need for sleep. So, sorry, I paused here for a second because I was trying to figure out if I wanted to just jump right into the next point or if I wanted to come back to it. Let's jump into it because I grabbed my coffee here. So a lot of people think that drugs like caffeine actually make you have more energy. Now, that isn't wrong, but it isn't right. Because energy is, if we want to get real technical thermodynamics, energy can't be created or destroyed. You can't just take a pill and it have energy. Energy is seen by calories or joules, is how we measure it in a sense for us. And caffeine doesn't actually have any caloric value to it that would provide sustainable energy. Now, what caffeine does do is that it interacts with the adenosine molecule. It's an antagonist, and it binds to it. And it sneaks into the spot where adenosine would typically bind. And so antidepressants, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. When your body releases serotonin, it has to be reabsorbed into the system. So that serotonin might make you feel happy. It might make you feel glad or whatever it makes you feel. Let's not get into that. Let's just say for the sake of this, it makes you happy. Well, as that floods your system and you're overwhelmed with this serotonin and this joy, this borderline state of euphoria, some people, their body absorbs that stuff back up really quick. And for other people, they need it to sit around in their system a little bit longer. So what an SSRI does is essentially it sits on the spot where a serotonin molecule would be taken back up into the system, a reuptake inhibitor, and it blocks it and forces the serotonin to sit in the system a little bit longer so that when you have these releases of serotonin, they're not just immediately gone. They get to sit in the system a little longer and give you that benefit. Now, this isn't necessarily, I'm not talking about the effectiveness of antidepressants. I'm just talking about mechanically how they work. Caffeine works very similar with the adenosine molecule. Now, here's the weird thing. You drink caffeine too early, it can have a negative effect on the natural melatonin in the system, which is kind of something that drives tired as well. So you have these two chemical forces, this adenosine buildup, but then our bodies, being aware to where we are and where we live, why it's important to get outside, are attuned to the environment. And they're attuned to the times of day when we wake up and when we fall back asleep and things like that, dictated by the biological clock, the circadian rhythm. And that's going to drive melatonin production. For some people, that could be 3, 4 p.m. It starts driving that melatonin production, and then you're tired by 8 or 9. And for some people, they have some substances in them. They, take caffeine late in the day, and that can reduce or change how the circadian rhythm is naturally releasing certain chemicals into the system. So now everyone's different. Some people say they sleep fine on caffeine. Even me, I would like to think that, but I'm not going to lie to myself anymore. I know that caffeine affects my sleep, and to anybody who says that they can sleep on caffeine, great. I bet you don't sleep well, though. So, chemical. Now, second force would be a circadian force. And circadian just means about a day. It's our internal biological clock. And the thing is our bodies are attuned to where we live in the 24-hour day cycle, and over thousands of years, millions of years, however you want to look at it, regardless of what timetable we're working on here, the body has adapted to its ecosystem. It's adapted to its environment, and it has developed an internal biological clock. All animals that exist have some sort of biological clock that drives behavior on a daily, weekly, monthly, however you want to look at it basis. But regardless, circadian forces are alive and well in biological creatures. Now, our sleep and our period of sleepiness, I guess we'll say, is usually bound to one period of time. And it's naturally triggered through circadian rhythm response. This is light dependent, and this is adenosine buildup dependent. So poor exposure to light, true light, not light, fake lights, even fake sunlight lights. The angle in which the light hits your eyes significantly affects chemical release in your body, whether it be in the morning or at night. Your eyes are an extension of your brain. They are just a sensory portion of your brain that is external. So your eyes' ability to sense things, and what they sense is light, is going to change the way that you sleep. Because it's going to affect your circadian rhythm. Another part of it is hormones that are driven by the circadian rhythm. Now, hormones are substances that are released by organs or glands in the body. And I want to separate organs and glands because I think, sciencey people do. But for the sake of this, let's just say that they are specialized areas of our body that are meant to perform a certain function in order to keep our body in homeostasis. I just made that up off the top of my head here. But that seems like a good enough definition. So think about it like areas of a workplace, or if you go to school, think about it like different classrooms. You go to biology class to learn about biology. You go to math class to learn about math. You need your blood cleaned. It's got to be done in a certain place. You need your blood pumped. It's got to be done by a certain thing. You eat something and it's high in fat. Well, you've got an organ to release a chemical to help break that down. So we have a lot of very specialized areas in our body, and they over time have developed the ability to work well together. Some people have certain areas of their body that don't work as well as others, and that's just what it is. I don't want to get into that too much. All right, hormones. So have you ever heard of cortisol? Like, you're actually going to be able to answer me back like fucking idiot. All right, so one of our waking hormones is cortisol, and I would say it's the primary waking hormone. Now, you might think it's adenosine because adenosine is building up in our system as we're awake, but I would say adenosine is one of our main sleep chemicals. Cortisol drives stress response. It drives a lot of things in the body, but it's released by our adrenal glands, along with small amounts of adrenaline and dope or epinephrine. So that would be adrenaline and noradrenaline, rather than I don't want to say adrenaline and epinephrine because that sounds like I'm talking about two things. It's really like adrenaline and anti-adrenaline, or what they call noradrenaline. And this can be natural, or this can be set by an alarm that wakes you up unnaturally, that shock to your system. Now, your body will naturally wake you up by driving cortisol levels in your system that could be either A, done by light, or B, done by time. So if you live in an area that is like Alaska, maybe, where your light wake cycles are completely fucked up because you have times of the year where there's no light and you have times of the year where there's only light. So you have to use things to simulate darkness or simulate light. I don't want to get into how bad that is for your body in general, based on, what we've learned about circadian rhythms and overall health. But I do want to make sure that people understand that when you wake up in the morning, cortisol is doing that. Cortisol is jolting you awake. So we just learned that cortisol is our awake chemical. And I know that I may have mentioned this in the past, and at some point maybe I'll do some more on it if I haven't here, that I've talked about how rough cortisol is for your body. Excess cortisol. Cortisol is required for our life. Just like any other hormone, insulin or cholesterol, normal amounts are fine. But, you fuck up your sugar intake, and next thing you know, your insulin levels are through the roof trying to get your blood sugar down, or you take in too much fat, and now your cholesterol levels are through the roof because they're trying to get rid of fat. Well, too much stress in your life, too many things that kick on your fight or flight response can increase your cortisol levels, thus or the foods that we eat, because what we've learned through circadian rhythm timing is that eating food at the wrong time of the day can kick on a cortisol response before it's supposed to. So all of these things are fine, but it's when we don't have proper levels that it becomes a problem. And that's just like anything. Whether you have too much water, too much salt, your body has different chemicals that it releases, and too great a quantity of any of those are going to cause problems. So let's walk through this. And I think I kind of I did write this out because I like the way that I wrote this out. So I'm going to read through it and I'll kind of stop and talk as I'm going through it. So let's start. You're asleep. So you're sleeping. Cortisol begins to be released in your body and you begin waking up. This isn't instantaneous. Now, for some people, the alarm might be something that your ear hears, which activates an area of your brain, which then tells your body to release the cortisol and wake you up. It's a panic response. Not a great way to start your day, by the way, with a huge spike of cortisol. Like, you do some research on that, it's going to tell you that, hey, if you can find a way to wake up naturally, it's much better for your system. So your body starts waking up, and from the moment your body starts waking up, adenosine is being produced. Now, here's what I'm interested in finding out. Is the adenosine that is being built up in the system the byproduct of activation of adenosine triphosphate, thus movement, thus adenosine as a precursor, adenosine breaking off, and it being the breakdown in the system? Or is the body's production of adenosine throughout all the areas in the cell begin once it detects that initial spark of cortisol? That I don't know. I wish I had an answer for you. I'm not that smart. I actually literally just thought of that question right now. But that starts a timer for the day. So when that cortisol goes off in the adrenal gland, boom, signal back to the brain, that starts a timer. Now, based on where you live and where you've lived for a while, which is why jet lag is a real thing, because it takes some time for your body to adjust to where it is in the world, because it understands that, yes, I'm still in the world. And while there might still be the same amount of time in the day, it might not be, your body has to adjust. And that's jet lag, is your body's circadian rhythm is trying to adjust to a new time area, a new zone of the world. It's using the data that it's picking up from where you're sleeping, where you're waking, what it's seeing, the light quality that it's getting in, and it's resetting your circadian rhythm. But that starts a timer in your body. And that timer starts a series of events that then continue throughout your day. And while I do want to talk about circadian rhythms in general, and maybe that'll be the next Maybe that'll be the next podcast, is just a real deep dive into circadian rhythms, because it's one of my favorite things to talk about. But I want to talk just about sleep today. So all those other things that happen between, let's say, wake up time and towards bedtime, we'll come back to. But let's just say that the timer starts, and that timer, depending on what time of year it is, where you live, within about a 12 to 14 hour window, will start producing melatonin. So let's say it's summertime where we have 16, 17 hours of daylight. That melatonin production might be pushed further out, because melatonin production is not just driven by that timer, but also light. So if it notices that, hey, I've been up for 14 hours, but it's still light outside, you might start to feel a little bit tired, but the levels of melatonin being produced are going to be less than if it was dark outside. So this wakefulness period is setting a timer for a sleepful period. So let's just look at it as periods of wake and periods of sleep. The sleep sets the wake sets the sleep. The wake sets the sleep. The sleep sets the week. So, or the wake. So I hope that makes sense. It's like, well, which one feeds? Well, they feed each other. I know it doesn't make sense. It's kind of a bit of a paradox, but just understand that they're working together. Now, to loop in another thing here, melatonin is not produced by the adrenal glands. It's not produced by something that we've talked about yet. It's produced by something called the pineal gland, and that melatonin production. So the pineal gland's a really interesting thing. Throughout all of, I would say, history, and specifically in shamanic cultures, there's a huge emphasis on the pineal gland being like a third eye, because it kind of sees the things that you can't see. It's like an eye that senses things that are not visible. Yes, that sounds fucking crazy, I know, but not everything is real like this. Not everything can I just point to and physically have here that is real, and I understand that. So just bear with me for a sec and understand that the pineal gland is a very special gland in our body. It's a very unique gland that has some very interesting functions with regards to sleep. Some people believe it's our soul. Some people believe it's like a third eye. But it's the only place in the body that creates and releases melatonin. And I know I've talked about melatonin quite a bit and how much I hate it and how much I think it's bad for us. I get that not everybody has the benefit of just being able to wake up and fall asleep. I know that some people have bad reactions to over-the-counter sleeping medications. I know personally, I have tried to avoid getting on any form of prescription sleep medication. I use the over-the-counter stuff when I have to, which lately has been a lot more often than I would like, and I'll explain in the next little segment here. But I will talk more about sex hormone impact from melatonin, because the amount of melatonin released by our body in comparison to the amounts of melatonin taken endogenously, not non-endogenously, but through an outside source, significantly different, just ridiculously different. And melatonin is a hormone, so it's not just like caffeine where your body takes it in and breaks it down. It's like, no, this is something that our body produces. If our body produced caffeine and then we took in crazy amounts of excess caffeine, I think just like we would see with any other hormone that our body produced, we would see a significant reduction in internally or endogenously produced amounts, because we have supplemented it with an extraneous source, which is now causing our body to kind of fix its own imbalance that we have caused on it. I'm gonna kind of segue here to something that I want to talk about that specifically has affected me, and it's something that I'm working on, as well as I think a lot of other people. Because we talked about the pineal gland and kind of all this weird stuff, it makes me think of cannabis and sleep. And now I want to talk about this from my personal experience, but I also want to talk about this from a data-driven standpoint. A lot of the same principles that apply to cannabis are also going to be applicable to other barbiturates, other intoxicants like alcohol, something that has an effect on our dopaminergic system or our serotonin levels. Any of those drugs that we put into our system are going to have an effect on our sleep if their half-life is still active and present at the time of sleep. So currently, I'm not using cannabis in any form or fashion. I say that, and I don't want to say I say that with sadness, because I've had to kind of understand that there are significant detrimental and negative consequences of using cannabis every single day. And as someone who has used cannabis for, I don't know, I think the first time I ever used it, I was like 15, and, periods of time off and on where it's once a week, once a month, whatever it is, none, to times where I've basically been, I guess you would call it intoxicated by it, but had it in my system for, years straight, where from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, it's just, I'm high. I see the benefits and I see the negativities. And I don't want to get into that discussion too much right now. I mainly want to look at it from a sleep standpoint. So I'm not using it for sleep anymore. And that's been really, really tough for me. And the reason that's been super tough for me is because I have some fucking gnarly dreams. I have dreams that make it difficult to live my life during the day because either A, they are variations of a real situation that has happened to me in an extremely vivid and horrifying way, that when I wake up, it has felt so real that it's debilitating in a way. And while I don't want to get too much into the personal content of those dreams, it's something that haunts me, that I've been trying to not let haunt me. As well as unrelated horrifying things like, and look, I am a firm believer that dreams have meaning outside of the necessity of our body's desire and need for dream states in order to maintain healthy function for brain and body. I think dreams have meaning. And I don't want to get too much into it because I don't want people looking into my dreams and being like, I'm Joseph and I've got an interpretation for you on your fat calves. No, I'm good on that. I'm working in my own ways to figure out the meaning behind these dreams. And I think they are very open and obvious meanings in these dreams, as well as there's probably some subcontext that I'm missing here. But I would say that dreams are probably one of the most misunderstood areas of humanity, that we will unlock something great when we understand them. But like I said, my extensive use of cannabis and substances greatly has affected my ability to sleep, because trying to sleep sober has been very tough. Trying to fall asleep creates an anxiety in me because I know I'm going to have fucked up dreams. And it's hard to fall asleep. And while I would say that those benefits that I gain from having a lack of inhibition about sleep, a lack of anxiety about sleep that happens when I smoke or use cannabis in any form, compounded with the no dreams was awesome for me because I could just fall asleep and not have to worry that I'm going to wake up having some horrible memory or some horrible thing be stuck in my head all day. But what I began to learn is that when I wouldn't use cannabis and when I would have nothing in my system, my dreams were significantly crazier. And so I did a little research on that. And there's a great podcast about sleep and specifically cannabis and sleep. I believe it is by Andrew Huberman, or it's by that guy out of Stanford or Harvard. I'm going to say Huberman. Let's say Huberman. He talked a lot about this and it kind of opened up my eyes. But essentially, the data shows that when you have sleep that does not have dreams in it, a non-dream state sleep, your body creates a log of that lost dream time. And let's say that your body requires 15 minutes of dream time per night in order to maintain a healthy balance. We'll just leave it at that. When you take a drug like cannabis or Unisom or ZQuil or drink alcohol or have any sort of barbiturate or intoxicant that affects the pineal gland, melatonin production, adenosine production, it screws with any of that, and you don't have that dream state, it keeps a log of that. It keeps a log of that deep dream sleep that you need and is required, and then it forces it upon you the next time that it has an opportunity. Now, let's say you've been smoking cannabis for 10 years every night to fall asleep, and you have a backlog of 365 days a year for 10 years, so 3,650 days at 15 minutes a day. That's a lot of dream sleep you got to catch up on. So the dreams are brutal. And they don't tell you that. They don't tell you that when you start, like when you go get a medical card for insomnia, or they don't tell you that because, well, you're just going to keep smoking. So, whatever it is. But the reason it needs that, your body needs that deep dream sleep for a reason. And I'm not claiming that I know or anybody knows why that is, but it's a requirement. And it's not worth it being on the back end of it now, dealing with all the side effects of that. So my only caution to people would be, if you like cannabis and if you like to sleep on cannabis, if it helps you fall asleep, if it helps you stay asleep, like, I get that. If I didn't have such a predilection for altered states of consciousness and enjoy that, I think maybe I would be able to use it for sleep. But the problem is that I enjoy the altered state of consciousness. I enjoy experiencing reality with a different feel. I enjoy exploring that part of my humanity. And I would just tell you as a caution that what helps now may not help in the future. And while it's one of the safer sleep aids, just be aware of that as you grow and as you sleep and as you do those things that you may be potentially risking losing out on a very important part of your sleep. All right. All right. Back to where we were. So, before I got into the whole melatonin side note thing, which then led to the cannabis thing, I was in the midst of talking about our second force. So we have our hormones that are releasing things into our body, and this process that drives sleep, they're always going to occur regardless of an outside stimulus. So the reason I say that is blind people still fall asleep. Now, blind people can develop a really fucked up issue called non-24 syndrome, where essentially their circadian rhythm is completely jacked up. Oversleeping here, undersleeping there, and then not being able to get back into a good rhythm can really mess it up. But the circadian rhythm is based on cortisol rise, not light stimulation. So even if you're missing a retinal nerve response, that cortisol, that rise in cortisol is going to drive your sleep-wake cycle. It's not the light. The light is an aid in it. So the neurons, though, in the eye are designed to look at light, and particularly they have almost, let's call it like a key for a specific frequency of light. The daylight, essentially daylight on Earth, like our the way that the light comes in, the amount of red, blue, whatever different types of light, that our eyes are able to process. This can help with sleep-wake cycles. There's some evidence that shows, going out in the morning at sunrise and looking towards the sunrise for anywhere from like 3 to 5 minutes a day kind of gets that circadian rhythm in track, as well as not using artificial lights at nighttime. There's a lot of different things that you can do, but at the end of the day, the cortisol response is what it is. And if you're blind, you may have a messed up cortisol response, thus the non-24 syndrome. But for most people, exposure to light helps kind of keep that cortisol response and the adenosine buildup happening at the right time. Now, that's kind of my answer to what is sleep. So when somebody asks me what is sleep, it's kind of hard for me to give an answer, because I feel like everything that I just said is what is sleep and why it's super, super important. But just in case that isn't enough, I want to talk a little bit more about why sleep is so important to our overall health. And I'm going to go through a few different areas. And while I do have a large emphasis on weight loss and a lot of the stuff that I do and I talk about, I'll mention sleep and weight loss here in a bit, but I want to focus on a lot of the other things. And while I pride myself in my ability to recall information and just kind of shoot from the hip, I have a lot of stuff written down here. So there's going to be some lists that I read here. There's going to be a few things that I kind of go through that will be almost verbatim, just me reading them, as well as just me kind of shooting from the hip a little bit here. So the question is, why is sleep important? So first and foremost, sleep-wake cycle disruptions or circadian rhythm disruptions are responsible for a significant increase in all-cause mortality. Now, if you don't know what that means, all-cause mortality just means your risk of dying goes up from any cause, whether it be cancer. Now, so let me make it as simple as possible. People who do not sleep well are at a higher risk of dying in all major measured categories: cancer, obesity, diabetes, colon disease, including Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, accidental death, suicide. Yes, you are more likely to get in a car accident or an accidental death, as well as to kill yourself, if you do not do the recommended level of sleep. Like, people need to understand that disease and sleep or lack of sleep are directly related. This isn't, they're correlated. No, this is a causation. Okay. And the reason why I would say it's a causation is because negative effects were observable in any patient who has shown a disruption in their circadian rhythm. I'm not saying all of those things. I'm saying at least one of those things. And none of those things are fun. So back to Sacha and Panda. And I have a link here for a PubMed article that I really like. And this actually hits a lot closer to home after the last year. And for those who aren't super familiar with the shit that I've had to walk through in the last few years, nothing like going from starting your own business to ruining your back to working overnights at Walmart, all in about a 2-year period of time. So I say this as somebody who has had to do first and third shift work. And first and third shift work is essentially work that starts after 6 p.m. or ends. So 6 p.m. would be the beginning of third shift, I guess we'll say. And then we'll call first shift work that starts sometime after 2 a.m. 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. Would be a disruption to your circadian rhythm cycle, depending on what time you went to bed. But there is a direct link to disease and lack of sleep or circadian rhythm disruptions. And now, having worked overnights at Walmart, I can tell you that there were significant changes to my health that I'm still working on almost a year out from doing this, as well as my sleep has never recovered. I have never slept past, I don't think I've slept past, 6:30, 7 a.m. one time since it's happened, because there's still something off. But these people who are working shift work, working overnights, like I was at Walmart, are going to have higher rates of disease and sickness. It's a guarantee. And now some of this might be caused by the type of people who are drawn to those positions, because I don't want to say that this is 100% causation. Some unhealthy people choose to work those overnight shifts because that is the only job that they can manage to do. Some people get sick working overnights because not necessarily immediately, but because what is available to you at those times is very poor. Not a lot of good quality food places open, as well as eating during those times is not probably great for your system, even if you're used to working overnight. So, the thing is in this study, they showed that after just 2 weeks, people were already starting to show signs of disease and sickness. Now, the crazy thing, just in 4 weeks. Now, the crazy thing is in 2 weeks, they started properly regulating their sleep again. They were starting to see diseases that had started to develop already start to reduce. And some disappeared completely. But we're talking about people developing blood sugar issues in 4 weeks. People seeing an increase in cancer cell counts in their body just in a matter of 4 weeks of working overnights. And in 2 weeks, you start to see a reduction in those again, of 2 weeks of having a more regulated sleep schedule. So what it tells us is two things. Our body is quick to fix things that it knows are wrong faster than it is to change to a circumstance that it knows it shouldn't be in. And I think that that's a really interesting thing, is that our body is hesitant to change for something that it knows it shouldn't be doing. It knows we shouldn't be awake overnight. It knows we shouldn't be eating those things. And it does everything that it can to start to fight those things off. But after about 4 weeks, it gives in. And it says, well, we're going to kill ourselves faster if we keep trying to mess with this. So it kind of gives in. But after just 2 weeks, it goes, okay, we're back to normal. We got to start fixing things. And some of it fixes quick and some of it doesn't. But I'm going to repeat this. There is a direct link between disease and circadian rhythm disruptions or lack of sleep. Now, circadian rhythm is going to be broken really into 3 periods of time. And that's going to be what Dr. Panda used for his study. P1, 2 a.m. to 10 a.m., P2, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., and P3, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. And each cycle has different gene expressions and hormone expressions that should occur during those times. But the disruptions to those signals caused by what we eat, when we eat, why we ate, how we slept, when we slept, why we slept, they can force our body out of rhythm and can cause chemicals and gene expression to occur at inopportune times, which can lead to a breakdown in the body. We know scientifically that eating carbs before 10 a.m. or so, approximately 10 a.m. for most people, and I hate to use very specific things like that, like 10 a.m., because it's a window. It's a window just like anything else. But we're going to shoot for 10 a.m. We know that eating carbs prior to our P2, we'll say, is going to have a significant impact on our cortisol levels. And increased cortisol levels too early in the day can lead to an increase in agitation, stress, can screw up melatonin production throughout the day. Now, not to really like kind of doomsday here, but I want people to understand when I talk about disease, what I'm talking about, and disruptions to these P1, P2, P3 cycles that we go through. So this is a list of diseases that significantly were impacted by circadian rhythm disruptions or were started to occur directly as a result of circadian measured. These are measured results. So ADHD, asthma, childhood obesity, Lyme disease, irregular menstrual cycles, fertility issues, morning sickness, miscarriages, depression, obesity, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, fatty liver disease, chronic kidney disease, acid reflux, arthritis, stroke, general myopathy or pain, breast cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer, liver cancer, insomnia, depression, anxiety, bipolar, PTSD. These were all measured in people with circadian rhythm disruptions. And I don't just mean measured like they had them, but measured and there was a negative impact on all of these areas, not in one person or a group of people, but thousands and thousands of people. So Dr. Sachin Panda's research, some of it is lab research and some of it is like volunteer cohort work. Some of it is actually like public work where he had an app for a while and, you know, you submitted certain information to him on a regular schedule and it tracked certain things that you did. And he was able to use that data just kind of as a global collection. Is it less reliable? Yeah, but I mean, I trust a person to tell me the truth who has nothing to gain over a pharmacology company to not lie in a study that has something to gain. So what this means essentially, I'm not saying that having a circadian rhythm disruption is going to give you colon cancer. What I'm saying is if you have cancer cells in your colon already and you have a predisposition for colon cancer, there may be an impact in a negative way on that colon cancer and your body's overall health by having significant disruptions to your circadian rhythm. That goes for any of these other things. If you don't sleep well and you don't eat well and your circadian rhythm is always jacked up and you have ADHD, your ADHD will be worse. That is a fact. That is from personal experience. That is from observable experience. That is from scientific data that has been extrapolated through multiple studies that shows in kids and in adults, you sleep like shit, you don't eat well, it's going to screw with you. And what we're starting to learn is this is because of the disruptions to circadian rhythm, not that the circadian rhythm disruption happens and then the ADHD happens. A lot of this stuff are underlying conditions in people that are exacerbated by poor habits and poor choices. The child doesn't want to be fat, but if you don't feed the kid well and you don't give him enough or her enough sleep and then you wake them up in the morning before they've gotten their sleep that they need. And then you feed them a bunch of shit in the morning. Well, of course their obesity is going to be worse. Like, common sense should always prevail. If you are doing things that are counterintuitive to health and healthy people, you will have negative side effects. You cannot escape this. No one can escape this. There is no NZT drug out there that is going to help you escape this. This is just what it is. Statistically, you have a higher likelihood of contracting or dying of any of those diseases that I listed if you get less sleep than you should. And less sleep than you should, I would say the bare minimum is probably 7 hours based on what we've seen with circadian rhythm timings. 7 full hours, not like I laid down in bed at 10 p.m. and I woke up at 5 a.m. No, unless you were asleep at 10 p.m. and then you woke up at 5 a.m., that's different. But you laying in bed and it taking some time to fall asleep, like, 7 hours seems to be the bare minimum that we need. Oh, this was the guy, Matt Walker. I knew I wrote down his name. So, like, what's his face? Andrew Huberman. Matt Walker's straight up G when it comes to sleep. He is the guy to go to. But I would say, based on his data, 7 hours is the bare minimum, but studies show that 8 is recommended. Now, the reason 8 is recommended is because we're not great with that. We're not great at distinguishing 7 or 8 hours because when we fall asleep versus when we lay down to fall asleep. If you're doing it right, you shouldn't know when you fall asleep. You can't just sit there and stare at the clock and then close your eyes and it's like, boom, out. Maybe. But more than likely, given that you were that tired in the first place, you probably wouldn't have much of a memory of what time you fell asleep because you would have been in a pretty crazy sleep state kind of for the most part already. And you may be one of those people who says, I only sleep 6 hours a night and I feel great. Now, great relative to what? Who are you comparing that to? Do you know what it's like to sleep 8 hours? I can tell you this. I only sleep about 6 hours a night, and it's not by choice. This is part of what I'm working on. I struggle to stay asleep. I struggle to fall asleep. They've done a study, and I believe Matt Walker did this study. The study essentially put people through different levels of sleep. So some people were restricted to 4 hours of sleep, 5 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep, 7 hours of sleep, 8 hours of sleep. So they had a few different control groups, as well as they had a few different groups as well as a control group of unrestricted sleepers. They could sleep however much they wanted. And they had them each perform a series of physical and mental tasks. And what it showed is essentially people who slept less than 6 hours a night scored similar to those who showed a legally drunk blood alcohol content. So if you sleep 6 hours or less a night, you're essentially walking around drunk. Not that you're mentally intoxicated, but that your brain performs at a level that it would if you were at a 0.08 blood alcohol content. The lack of response, the lack of attention to detail, the ability to comprehend more complex subject matter, all of those things affected. But to those getting 7+ hours a night, much better off. Now, some of the subjects didn't notice really anything different. That was less than 5% of people. So I think it was like 0.5% actually of people were seen to have been able to sleep less than 6 hours a night. And part of this is because sleep is broken into two halves. You kind of have a physical repair half and a mental repair half. And your body works on getting the mind ready first, which is why taking a nap kind of helps you feel mentally refreshed. Whereas from a physical standpoint, that's going to be done in that second half of sleep. So, you're physically just not going to quite be there. As well as, your body's, of course, still working on your mind in that second half of sleep. So it's not like it gets it done, but it might get like 80% of the work done in those first 2 REM cycles. All that to say, the data is very clear. 7+ hours of sleep a night, 7 or 8, is going to get you your REM cycles that you need. And it's going to help you perform better, as well as, or just not perform worse. All right, back to melatonin for a second. There have been, because I want to talk about this, things that really fuck with our sleep. Now, melatonin, TV, and smartphones are going to be the 3 things that I think fuck us up the most when it comes to sleep. So I want to talk about melatonin first, and then I'll go to TVs and smartphones. So it delays and stops puberty in some children. So please talk to your doctors. Now, this has been shown that there is a significant impact on humans, but in studies done on mice and rats and hamsters, they saw a reduction in the size of their genitals. They saw a reduction in their puberty, or their developmental, their puberty, I guess, for them. But what we see that in children too, that it suppresses puberty. And in adults, it can mess with your primary sex hormones significantly. This is not me saying that this is 100% melatonin's fault, but I can tell you that taking melatonin, my hormone levels while exercising and lifting weights on a daily basis were anywhere from 100 to 300. I believe one of the lowest results I got was 140 something, like 141 or 147. It was very, very low. With no testosterone replacement therapy, with no melatonin, my natural testosterone levels are sitting between 450 and 550, depending on when I go in and get them done. So I'm not blaming melatonin. I'm just saying it's a little sketchy that the only difference in my behavior patterns was melatonin, and I saw almost a 300% reduction, or 300% increase in hormone levels, 400%. So the reason why melatonin is causing such a big problem is because it's a hormone, and just like any other hormone, your body is set to have a certain specific level present and active in it, with caps on the bottom and caps on the top in order to keep you within a healthy range. The lowest the lowest over-the-counter dose that I have ever seen at a store for melatonin is 1 milligram. I've never seen a 0.5 milligram. But the average pill is between around 1 milligram and 5 milligram, with a high of the highest I've ever seen is 12 milligrams. Now, the other crazy thing is that even amongst the best brands of medicines out there and supplements, there's about a plus or minus 385% variation, which means that your 1 milligram pill could be 3.85 milligrams. It also means that your 12 milligram pill could be almost 40 milligrams, or it could be, subtract by that. Your 1 milligram pill could be only 0.3 milligrams. Now, that would be not a bad thing, because according to the data, a recommended dosage of externally introduced melatonin would be around 0.1 and 0.3 milligrams. So when we're talking about the average pill is already 3 times stronger than the recommended dose here of 0.1 to 0.3, anywhere from 3 to 10 times stronger. And then on top of that, we have a standard deviation of almost 400%. I'd say don't take it. Don't waste your time on melatonin. Don't mess with it if you can avoid it. And if you're taking melatonin on a regular basis and you're afraid to switch, go to the doctor, talk to them, figure out what they can do. I'm not saying get on a prescription sleeping medicine. Get a blood test done. Figure out, are my hormones off? If this is having a negative impact on your body, you may not even be aware because you felt like shit for such a long time that the idea of feeling different or better doesn't seem really possible. So that's all I'll say about melatonin with regards to sleep. Yes, it may help you sleep, but is it worth it? Now, smartphones, TVs, specifically what we're talking about is blue light exposure once the sun has gone down. It tricks our brain into thinking that our melatonin timer hasn't gone off. It tricks our brain. It screws with the way that our retinal nerves talk to our brain and tell it that it's daylight. So, couple things. I know that I said earlier that there is a common practice of not really using a whole lot of light in your house past when it's time to go to sleep or past when the sun goes down. That's a little tough this time of year because it gets dark at 4:30, 5 o'clock here in Missouri. So that's a little bit annoying. It's a little bit annoying to just have a dark house. So you want to limit that light. You want to reduce the blue light. For your phones, this means switching it to a night mode where it gets rid of the blue light. Keep the brightness down on it. Smartphones, TVs, that light exposure, this also creates cortisol in the system, which is going to delay and disrupt your melatonin production naturally, and that's going to mess with your natural sleep-wake cycle. So all of this is not meant to be look at all that you're doing wrong. What can you change? What can you do better? I'm saying all this so that you understand the importance of sleep and maybe some areas, if you are not happy with your sleep, that you can start to pull on and maybe see some progress. I know that our culture is a little bit addicted to our phones and our screens. And some of you may even be listening to this right now as you're laying in bed and you're thinking, well, Zach, if I were to turn this off, I wouldn't be listening to it. Great. Turn me off. I would rather you sleep than listen to me. But you have to limit your exposure to these lights. We have to limit things that cause cortisol response in our bodies after certain times of the day. They're gonna impact our circadian rhythm. They're going to impact our ability to sleep effectively and repair and refuel ourselves for another day. Last thing I will mention, and this is because obviously as someone who focuses a good amount on weight loss, I will just basically say this as a statement from studies that I have read. There are studies that show an up to 70% reduction in possible fat loss on people who are on a diet but sleep less than 7 hours a night. Now, what this meant is that the people lost less weight. The people who slept less than 7 hours a night lost less weight than those who slept more than 7 hours a night. And of the weight that they lost, there was a 70% reduction in actual fat content of the weight lost, meaning they were losing more muscle mass, they were losing small amounts of bone density, and they were losing fluids. 70% reduction in fat loss doing the same diet just by changing their sleep. So when you're looking into an area of your life that you can actually effectuate some serious change, this is one of the better places to start. Starting with sleep, starting with what can I be doing on my own to create a positive change in your life? Work on this. I'm not saying that I have some answer on, hey, here's how you're going to sleep better. I wish I knew. But I think everyone is so different when it comes to sleep. While we all need sleep and we all need to be getting, at least 7 hours according to the data, how we go about that and the habits and patterns surrounding sleep are going to significantly vary from person to person. So it's hard to provide advice to someone specifically in a podcast, and that's why I don't. I try to keep this very general, and then hopefully you can figure out which area you need to dive into. But that is pretty much all I had on sleep. Now, I have a bunch of other topics I'd like to talk about, and unfortunately, I have a lot of political type stuff I would like to talk about with regards to some of the appointments that were made with Health and Human Services, and just hoping to calm some people's minds on some things, because I think it's going to be a good thing. But I don't want to necessarily turn this into a politics channel. I don't really want to do a whole lot on that. I might have to do a side channel of just putting out politic type videos or political videos, because I really think that there is a lot of poorly expressed information that may be misleading or misguided, an attempt to paint somebody in a negative light that I do believe has America's best interests in mind. I think that RFK is going to be fantastic for our country when it comes to promoting good, positive health across a wide variety of areas to the American people, providing more information and clarity on food and drugs, putting people in positions of power to do studies that actually tell us beneficial things about us as humans and humanity as a whole. So I just want people to know that there is a lot of information out there. And for every single piece of information that I believe is factual in here, there's probably somebody online who will say something negative or something against that. And that's fine. Like, I don't care. That's the beauty of America and free speech, is that someone has the same right to lie as somebody does to tell the truth. And hopefully by putting some of this information out here, it'll drive some of you guys to go and look at some of these studies and look at some of these sources in order to find out more, if that's what you want. But I have a lot of different things I want to talk about on here. I know I want to talk about memory and brain health. I know I want to talk about stress, the muscles, exercise, why social media is so bad for us. I got a lot. But we'll get to it. So, I appreciate you all.
When I die, I'll take nothing that I took down in the dirt. Lord, I'll cry and I'll be avenged by all those I hurt.